Orlando, Florida.
And how old are you now?
23.
Are you currently employed?
Yes, sir.
Where do you work?
Walden Security.
And what do you do?
Walden Security.
And what do you do for Walden Security?
I'm a security officer.
How long have you done that?
2 years.
Now pull that mic down, and that way you don't have to lean into it every time. There we go. Do you go to school?
Yes.
Where do you go to school?
University of Central Florida.
And are you pursuing a degree there?
Correct.
And how long have you been in college to this point?
I'm a senior, so about 4 years.
And what degree are you pursuing?
Criminal justice.
Now, did you know a person named Alexandria Chery?
Yes.
What was your relationship to her?
She is my sister.
Older or younger?
Younger.
How much younger than you was your sister?
3 years apart.
Throughout the course of your growing up, were the two of you ever separated? And by that I mean, did you ever live apart from one another when you were kids?
No, sir.
Did you spend a lot of time with your sister?
Yes, sir.
How would you define your relationship with your sister?
Very close.
I'm going to ask a strange question that will be important later. Did you ever see your sister keeping a knife in her room?
No, sir.
Did you ever know of her keeping a knife in her room?
No, sir.
After her disappearance, did you ever find any knives missing from your apartment?
No, sir.
Are you aware of anybody else finding a knife missing from your apartment?
No, sir.
Now, it's my understanding that the last time you saw your sister alive was on July 27th of 2014. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
And that was in the summertime, right?
That is correct.
So school was out? Well,
For her it was, but for me I was still in school.
all right. Now, July 27th, the last day you saw her was a Sunday. Is that right?
That is correct.
Did you spend any time with your sister that Sunday?
Yes, sir.
What did you do with your sister on Sunday, July 27th?
We went to church.
What time was that?
I would say approximately 10 o'clock in the morning.
Did anybody go with you to church?
Yes, sir.
Who else went with you?
Dana St. Fleur and Aaliyah.
Did you know Miss St. Fleur?
Yes, sir.
And are you a blood relationship to her?
Yes, sir.
What's your blood relationship to her?
She is my cousin.
What about, you called her Aaliyah. What about Aaliyah? Is she a blood relationship or something else?
No, sir. She's my sister's best friend.
Right. So you described the relationship between your sister and Aaliyah. What was the relationship between your sister and Dana?
They were cousins.
Were they close friends, or were they friends at all? I guess I should ask.
Yeah, they're friends.
Okay. When you went to church on Sunday with your sister, did she have any injuries to her mouth?
No, sir.
Did she have any injuries to her teeth that you were aware of?
No, sir.
And I'm assuming that during that day you had an opportunity to observe your sister's mouth and her teeth up close?
Yes, sir.
Did she complain of any pain in her mouth or to her teeth?
No, sir.
Now, how'd you guys get to church?
I drove.
And what time did you leave church, approximately?
Around about 12.
Okay, and where did you go after church?
I dropped them off to my Uncle Ray.
And where did you go after you dropped them off?
To my apartment.
Did you have to work that Sunday?
I don't believe so. I don't recall.
Okay. Your sister, it was summertime, but was she attending high school during the normal school year?
That is correct.
What high school did she go to?
Olympia High School.
Now, you said that you were in school that summer. Where were you going to school that summer?
At that time, I was going to Valencia, West Campus.
Had you just graduated from high school?
Correct.
What high school had you gone to?
Olympia High School.
So your time as a senior overlapped with your sister's time at the same high school, is that right?
That is correct.
And I think you said earlier that you drove on Sunday, correct?
That is correct.
So did you have your own car?
That is correct.
And During the school year, would you ever drive your sister to school?
That is correct.
How often?
Very often.
More than 2 or 3 days a week?
That is correct.
When you weren't driving her to school, what kind of activities would you do with your sister?
Go shopping.
Now, was that shopping for you or shopping for her?
Both. I would say both.
Okay? Now, were you working back in 2014?
Yes, I was.
Where did you work back then?
Polo Ralph Lauren.
Did you occasionally use some of your money to buy things for your sister?
That is correct.
Did you contribute to any of the bills in the household?
That is correct.
Which ones did you assist with?
Internet.
Now, where were you living back in July of 2014?
303 Hawthorne Hill Place.
Now, is that a house or an apartment?
Apartment 201. Apartment.
Who else lived in the apartment with you?
My mother, Rosalie Joseph. My sister, Alexandria Chery. And myself.
You referenced Aaliyah and Dana St. Fleur. In the months or time leading up to your sister's disappearance, did she spend a lot of time with those two individuals?
At the time she was disappeared?
Well, in the months leading up to that.
Yes, she did.
Now, when did Sanel Saint Simon come into your life?
11 years since that incident.
Okay, so how old were you when he first came into your life?
Probably say I was 8.
Meaning Alex would have been approximately 5 years old?
Correct.
Okay. Now, do you know if he and your mother were actually married?
No, sir.
I'm sorry, that was a bad question. Is it that you don't know or that they were not married?
They were not married.
Right. But did he live with you most of that time from the time you were 8 until your sister disappeared?
That is correct.
Did you have an opportunity to observe the relationship between Sanel Saint Simon and your mother?
Yes.
How would you describe it?
I would say teamwork, like, they're close. They're very close.
Were they ever affectionate in front of you?
Rarely.
Did you ever observe Sanel Saint Simon make any romantic gestures towards your mother?
Again, rarely.
Overruled. I'll allow it.
Go ahead, sir.
Very rarely.
Did you ever know him to buy her clothes or electronics?
No, sir.
Or gifts of any kind?
No, sir.
What was your relationship with Sanel Saint Simon like?
Very close. I called him father. We had a good relationship.
Did you respect him?
Yes, sir.
And did he help provide for your family financially?
Yes, sir.
And do you see the person that you know as Sanel Saint Simon in the courtroom today?
Yes, sir.
Can you please point to him and describe an article of his clothing, the color of his jacket in particular?
Bald head, headset, navy blue coat, blue tie, white button down.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant. I'm sorry.
Record will so reflect.
Now, during the course of your time living in the household over 11 years, did you have the opportunity to observe interactions and the relationship between the defendant and your sister, Alexandria Chery?
Yes, sir.
How would you characterize his relationship with your sister in the months leading up to her disappearance and eventual death?
They were always close.
Did they speak often?
Yes.
Do you know if they communicated by phone, if you know?
Yes, sir.
What did she call the defendant?
She also called him father.
Now, were there occasions where the defendant would do things for your sister Alex behind your mother's back?
Yes, sir.
How would you describe your mother's attempts to keep an eye on your sister?
She was very diligent, I would say. Very diligent.
She's strict on your sister?
Very strict.
Did your mother want your sister Alexandria Chery going out to parties or staying out late?
No, sir.
Did you ever have an opportunity to observe the defendant's reactions to your mother's attempts or to your mother telling her she couldn't do things?
Yes, sir.
What was his position on that?
He was always on my sister's side.
In other words, would he advocate for her to be able to go and do things your mother would say she could not?
Correct.
Whose side were you usually on, or did you take a side?
I didn't.
Were there times when your mother would explicitly tell your sister Alex that she could not go somewhere?
Yes, sir.
And did you become aware of times where she would in fact go to those places anyway?
Yes, sir.
Do you know how she got there?
Yes, sir.
And how would she get to those places?
By Sanel Saint Simon.
Were there times during, particularly, and I'm talking about when Alex had become a teenager, okay? Were there times when your mother, Rosalie, would attempt to discipline Alex?
Yes, sir.
What kind of things would she want to discipline your sister Alexandria Chery for?
With all her technology as far as her iPad, her phone, staying home.
So if she did something she wasn't supposed to do, your mother would take those things away. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Did you ever have the opportunity to observe the defendant's reaction to those attempts to discipline?
Yes, sir.
And how would he react to any attempts by your mother to discipline your sister Alex?
He would refuse.
What do you mean?
He would refuse her punishments.
Would he assist your sister in getting items back?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you at some point become aware that your sister had a navel piercing?
Repeat that?
Did you at some point become aware that your sister had a navel piercing or a belly button ring?
Yes, sir.
Did you actually see it for yourself?
Yes, sir.
Do you know if your mother ever became aware of it?
Yes, sir.
And did you see her reaction to that?
Yes, sir.
Were you there when she found out about it?
Yes, sir.
And what was your mother's reaction?
She was frustrated
Why was she frustrated?
because she asked my sister, who took you to get...
And don't say what somebody else told you. She was frustrated. Had she told your sister not to do that?
Correct.
During the time that you lived in the household, did you ever become aware that the defendant was buying items or spending money on your sister above and beyond the everyday necessities of a child?
Yes, sir.
What types of things, well, let's talk about specific items. Did you become aware that he purchased specific items for her?
Yes, sir.
Overruled. You can answer that.
Again, yes, sir.
What items are you aware that he purchased for her?
iPad, her cell phones, both of them, hair salons, clothing.
And when you say hair salons, purchase or funded her ability to attend or go to them?
Correct.
Now, did your sister work when she was a teenager in these months leading up to her disappearance?
Yes.
And did she make money for that?
Yes.
Was it enough money to purchase the items and do the things you just described?
No, sir.
Did you ever see your sister with substantial sums of cash?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you give her that money?
No, sir.
And she didn't make that much money on her own, is that right?
That is correct.
Do you know where she got that money?
Yes, sir.
And who gave it to her?
Sanel Saint Simon.
Lay a predicate, please.
How do you, well, I'll answer yes or no to this question. Do you know who gave it to her?
Yes, sir.
Did you observe the giving of that money to her?
Yes, sir.
And who gave her the money?
Sanel Saint Simon.
Now, during the time that you observed the giving of all these gifts, do you know where your stepfather, Sanel Saint Simon, was working.
Yes, sir.
And where was he working?
Boston Market.
Now, what was your family's money or financial situation at that time? And at that time, I mean in the year or two leading up to her disappearance.
We were on a budget,
Was it a large budget or a small one?
a small one.
Now, to be fair, Mr. St. Simon occasionally purchased items for you, is that right?
That is correct.
Which specific items did he purchase for you?
A cell phone. He used to get me haircuts and a skateboard.
Okay. Would you agree that Mr. St. Simon made your sister's life easier?
Absolutely.
And would you agree that she was more likely to get what she wanted from him than anyone else in your family?
Absolutely.
Now, did there come a time when you felt you needed to prevent your sister from being alone with Sanel Saint Simon?
Yes, sir.
How did you go about doing that without saying what anybody may have told you? How did you go about trying to prevent them from being alone together?
Well, we simply, when there's opportunities where she would be alone, we would definitely take her to my aunt's or someone else's house.
Did Sanel Saint Simon ever speak to you about him being, or how he felt about his restricted access to your sister Alex?
Objection, calls for hearsay.
Can answer yes or no.
No, the question is, did Sanel Saint Simon speak to him?
I know, that's a yes or no answer.
No, sir.
Did,
No, sir.
do you know how he felt about the fact that his time with Alex was being limited?
Hearsay.
The question is, does he know? Yes or no
He can
answer.
answer that.
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, without saying what you know, how is it that you knew that?
There was an occasion.
It's hearsay by implication.
Approach, please.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'm going to try to ask a specific question, so just listen carefully to the specific question.
Yes, sir.
Did Sanel Saint Simon ever speak to you about jealousy that he had with someone else being able to spend time with your sister Alex?
No, sir.
Was your sister permitted to spend time with a relative, not Mr. Saint Simon?
Repeat that?
Right, was there an incident where there was Mr. St. Simon expressed frustration about Alex spending time with a relative?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overruled.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, who was the relative she was going to spend time with?
My great aunt, Claire Benjamin.
Right, and what was the frustration that the defendant expressed?
Envious, jealousy. He felt like he wasn't getting the time to spend with my sister compared to my great aunt.
I'm assuming you remember the night that it was discovered that your sister was gone, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you gave statements to law enforcement and were involved in trying to locate her, is that fair?
Yes, sir.
Following that, did your family, and by that I mean you and your mother, have to move out of the apartment where you lived?
Yes, sir.
Where did you move?
To my aunt's house, Paula. My aunt's house, Paula.
Was part of the reason you had to move out financial?
Yes, sir.
Were you and your mother on your own able to cover the rent and utilities for that apartment?
Which apartment?
The one at 201?
No, sir.
Did you have a bed at your aunt's house?
Couch.
Okay. And how long did you live with your aunt?
I would say a year.
Going back to Sunday, July 27th, the day before your sister disappeared, did you have a conversation with the defendant the Sunday night before she disappeared about what your schedule was going to be that week?
Absolutely.
And what reason, well, did he specifically ask you when you would be at school that week?
A full detailed schedule.
Did you tell him what your schedule was?
I wrote it down.
So you told him you would be gone on Monday morning, the 28th, is that right? It goes for the effect on the listener, Judge, which is the defendant.
Overruled. He can answer.
Go ahead.
Correct.
And you said, did you write it down, you said you wrote it down for him?
Yes, sir.
Who asked you to do that?
Sanel Saint Simon?
Had he ever asked you to write down your schedule for a week prior to that date?
No, sir.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, I have it in line of the way that I have it written out, not necessarily in line with the way your direct testimony went, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, you said that Mr. St. Simon resided with you and your mom for about 11 years, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And during that time, he contributed to the household.
Yes, ma'am.
In fact, he would sacrifice his own things in order to contribute money to the household, right?
Not to my knowledge.
He never pawned his own items in an effort to bring money into the home?
Not to my knowledge.
Do you recall giving a deposition on Friday, July the 17th of 2015?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And do you recall being placed under oath at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
And at that time, you swore to tell the truth, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. If I were to show you, page 10, a copy of your deposition, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Might it reflect your recollection?
Absolutely.
Page 10. Do you recall being asked that, may I retrieve the document?
You may.
Do you recall being asked that question? Do you recall your response?
Yes, ma'am.
Action and proper impeachment. You just need to see the transcript, Judge.
Let me see it, please.
May I rephrase the question?
Sure.
So isn't it true that he sold things, his own belongings?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. And that was to bring in money to the house?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. You described him as a yes man, is that right?
I'm sorry?
As a yes man, meaning he would always say yes to requests made?
Yes, ma'am.
And not just by Alex, but by you or by your mother, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you were mentioning on direct that he bought Alex an iPad and an iPhone, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And he, in fact, bought you also an iPhone, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And at this time, in 2014, you were 18, right?
18 going on 19. Yes, ma'am.
Correct me, please, if I'm wrong about any of that. And you were working at Ralph Lauren Polo?
Yes, ma'am.
So you had money of your own,
Yes, ma'am.
and you contributed to the household.
Yes, ma'am.
So you weren't asking for gifts in the same way that Alex was asking, right?
That is correct.
And you would describe yourself even at that time as being more independent, right?
That is correct.
And so the only thing that you had in fact asked for was the skateboard, and you got it, right?
That is correct. Also the phone.
And the phone. And at times, you felt bad that you didn't have the heart to ask for more, right?
Not necessarily.
Do you recall being asked that question in the deposition that I referenced earlier?
I don't recall.
If I were to show you a copy of the transcript, might it refresh your recollection?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I retrieve the document?
You may.
So, Mr. Cherry, do you remember, I said bad, do you remember feeling a little jealous that you didn't have the heart to ask for more?
From people, yes.
Okay. But your sister didn't have any problem asking for the things that she needed, right?
That is correct.
And so, in the same way that you got barbershop haircuts, the way of maintaining her hair would be to take her to the salon, right?
That is correct.
Now, naturally, her hair care was far more expensive than the barber cuts that you would receive, right?
That is correct.
But that's by the nature of how women take care of their hair?
Absolutely.
Okay. The places that you mentioned that Mr. St. Simon would take Alex, he didn't stay there with her, right? He would take her and drop her off at the mall,
That is outside my knowledge.
okay? Or to a friend's house,
That's outside my knowledge.
okay? And the parties that you were mentioning on direct that your mom didn't want her to go to, are those the parties that your Uncle Ray would put on?
Incorrect.
Okay. So your Uncle Ray's parties that he had were different.
Very different.
So those were at-night parties at clubs, right?
My uncle's parties?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, Alex and Dana and Aaliyah would be featured on the flyers that would be handed out as advertisements for those parties, right?
Relevance.
I'll allow it. She's uncrossed. I'll give her a little leeway. Go ahead.
Repeat.
Sure. The parties that your Uncle Ray would have, and by the way, your Uncle Ray is your mother's brother, right?
That is correct. Ray.
And he would have parties on a regular basis, is that right?
Yes.
How regular is regular? Every Friday?
Twice a week, every Friday.
Okay. And Uncle Ray would feature Alex, Dana, and Aaliyah, at least on one advertisement that I know of, right?
Outside my knowledge.
Okay. These were parties that, would you say hundreds of people attended?
Outside my knowledge.
You didn't go to the parties?
I'm a book guy.
Yes, sir. Okay. Your mom was more like you, wouldn't you agree, in that she wasn't one to ask for things for herself, right?
Absolutely.
But she would encourage Alex to get her hair and her nails done, wouldn't she?
Outside my knowledge.
Okay. Do you recall being asked that question in the deposition?
I don't recall.
If I were to show you a copy of the transcript, would that refresh your recollection?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, sir. May I retrieve the document?
You may.
So, Mr. Cherry, do you recall whether or not now that you've had a chance to read the transcript, your mom encouraged Alex to get her hair and her nails done?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's a yes to the question, not just the recollection?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. St. Simon was always with the family, right?
Yes, ma'am.
He didn't go out very often with his friends. In fact, you weren't even sure he had any friends, right?
That is correct.
Okay. One other item, correct me if I'm wrong, your mom and Mr. St. Simon went in on buying you the Acura that you drove at this time, is that right?
Outside my knowledge.
The Acura that you were driving in 2014, that was your car, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you don't recall whether or not your mom and Mr. St. Simon purchased that car for you?
Outside my knowledge.
Okay. Do you recall being asked that question in the deposition that I've referenced earlier?
I don't recall.
If I were to show you a copy of the transcript, would it refresh your recollection?
Absolutely.
Has that refreshed your recollection as to whether or not It was Mr. St. Simon who assisted in getting you the vehicle?
No, ma'am.
Okay,
The line before it, they gave me the idea.
so I've misunderstood.
Yes, ma'am.
I apologize.
No worries.
Thank you for correcting me.
No worries.
So they didn't even co-sign it for you?
Outside my knowledge.
Okay. At the house, Alex's bed had recently been purchased for her, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you all kept the plastic on your mattresses, right?
I don't recall.
If I were to refresh your recollection with, or if I were to show you the transcript, would that refresh your recollection?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, sir, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you all kept the plastic on your mattress, right, on Alex's mattress, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Also, I wanted to ask you about the white truck that they shared. There was a trick to starting it at this time, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
The key was stuck inside of it, is that right?
I do believe so.
There was some problem with turning it on and off, is that right?
I don't recall.
But there was a trick to turning it on?
Indeed.
Okay. On the night that you all discovered Alex missing, the police were at your house, and later in the evening, Mr. St. Simon left the apartment, right?
Yes.
And when he left was somewhere between 11 and 12, is that right?
I don't recall.
Do you recall, if I were to show you a copy of the transcript of your deposition, would that refresh your recollection?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Hold on to it for me. So I believe it was around 11 or 12 that Mr. St. Simon left the apartment,
Yes, ma'am.
and that was at a time that law enforcement had retrieved everyone's car keys. Is that correct?
Out of my knowledge.
Okay. Do you recall being asked that question in the deposition?
I do not recall.
If you were to take a look at the rest of that page, might it refresh your recollection as to the conversation?
Absolutely.
Please.
Yes.
And just so that we're clear, when Mr. St. Simon left the house at 11 or 12 at night, that was at a time that the police had confiscated everyone's keys, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So they had let him leave. Yes, ma'am. The police had allowed Mr. St. Simon to leave the apartment, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And he was gone for about, 30 minutes or so, is that right?
I don't recall the time.
Would it refresh your recollection if you were to read the transcript, just another line down or so?
Absolutely.
Please feel free.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So just so we're clear, you believed he was gone about 30 minutes, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, there were times that Alex would be punished, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So like when she missed curfew. Does that sound familiar?
What do you mean by miss curfew?
Curfew is the word I used. So when your mom would allow Alex to go out, she would tell her that there was a time that she needed to be home by, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And in some increments of time, often, however you want to describe it, she would not be home at the time that she was supposed to be home. Is that right?
That's correct.
And during those times, you would discipline her by taking her cell phone or her iPad away for her, right?
That is correct.
And you would give it to your mom to hold, right?
Occasionally, yes.
Okay, sometimes you would hold it yourself?
Correct.
Okay. And You would characterize yourself as being also a disciplinarian in the home for Alex, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And at the times that Mr. Williams was saying on direct that Mr. St. Simon would try to get her things back, you meant by convincing your mom to return the items to her, right?
Me and my mom.
But by verbally trying to convince you to give the items back.
Physically removing it from the safe.
Safe.
Safe. We had a safe at the house.
And during those times that she would be late for curfew, she would tell you that her phone was dead, but it wasn't really, right?
Objection, relevance, and hearsay.
Sustained.
Now, you testified on direct that Mr. St. Simon knew of your schedule that week.
That is correct.
Do you recall specifically addressing this issue in your deposition in 2016?
I don't recall.
If I were to show you the page and line number to refresh your recollection, would that assist you?
Indeed.
And do you recall being asked at that time if Mr. St. Simon would know when you would be home or not?
According to the question, it says on the day that my sister...
It would just be to refresh your recollection. I'm not sure that they want you to actually read
Oh.
it out loud. If you need to clarify a point, certainly. But my question is, do you recall being asked if Mr. St. Simon would know what your schedule was for
Sure.
school or for work when you would be home?
Correct.
And do you recall, now that you've reviewed the transcript, saying no, that he wouldn't know whether or not you would be home?
He got my full week schedule. The day my sister disappeared, I wouldn't know. It was Monday through Friday.
May I approach the
You may.
witness? Do you recall being asked if Mr. St. Simon would specifically know whether or not when you would be home or not?
Correct.
I'm sorry, objection, Judge, because there's no question that's being asked, we're just reading from the transcript, so it's improper impeachment.
Sustained. Approach, please.
The day that your sister disappeared, would Mr. St. Simon have knowledge that you would be home at a specific day or time, or a
Objection.
specific time?
Speculation.
Sustained.
Can I ask if he would know whether or not Mr. St. Simon would know what his schedule would be like on the day that she disappeared?
He can't speculate as to what somebody else might know. You can ask him any question you want, but he can't speculate to what somebody else might know.
Judge, can we approach?
You may.
Yes, sir.
Does that appear to be the new mattress that was bought?
Yes, sir.
So you think that this worn mattress is new?
No, sir.
Okay, so that doesn't appear to be the new mattress.
No, sir.
No further questions.
Thank you. May he be excused from subpoena and from the courthouse.
He is excused and released, Judge.
Okay, and Ms. Hyde? Sir, you're free to step down, and you're released.